I'm 33 now. I own my own place in a quiet neighborhood, work in a field I genuinely love, and I have no debt, no strings, no one breathing down my neck. From the outside, my life probably looks boringly stable. I keep to myself, I don't post much online, I don't go to family reunions or holiday dinners. If you met me, you'd probably just see a normal guy who pays his bills on time, takes pride in his work, and enjoys his peace. But peace didn't come cheap. And I don't mean in money. Growing up, my parents hammered one phrase into me so relentlessly that it's practically carved into the back of my skull. You owe us. They said it after dinner when I didn't finish the food on my plate. They said it when they bought me a winter coat that wasn't even new, just one they found on sale. They said it when they paid my school fees, when they signed a field trip permission slip, when I needed new shoes, when I got sick and had to go to the doctor. It wasn't, "We love you," or "We're proud of you." It was always, "Don't forget you owe us for this. You owe us for everything." It wasn't subtle. My dad would actually pull out a little notebook sometimes, slap it on the table, and joke that he was keeping tabs on how much raising me was costing them. He'd flip through fake entries like food, $200, clothes, $150, gas to drive your ungrateful ass to school, $30. And then he'd laugh and look me dead in the eye. "One day you're gonna have to pay us back. Don't think you're getting a free ride here." My mom wasn't as blunt, but she was worse in some ways. She'd use guilt instead of jokes. If I ever asked for something, like a new backpack because mine was tearing at the straps, she'd sigh long and loud, press her hand to her forehead, and say something like, "Do you have any idea what we already sacrificed for you? You think money grows on trees? We could have spent that money on ourselves, but we don't, because of you. You owe us." When you're a kid, you don't question that. You just absorb it. You start to believe you really are a walking bill. A liability. A debt to be repaid. I remember being 9 years old, sitting in my room, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, and trying to calculate how long it would take me to pay them back once I grew up. I didn't know what jobs paid, but I knew they wanted the money. So I imagined myself working every day, handing over my paycheck, just so they'd stop reminding me. That feeling never went away. It wasn't just about money either. Love in my house was always a transaction. My dad would ruffle my hair or call me champ only after I did something that benefited him, like mowing the lawn without being asked, or bringing him a beer while he watched TV. If I made a mistake, like accidentally dropping a glass or getting a bad grade, that affection vanished, replaced with a lecture about how much more expensive I was making their lives. Even birthdays weren't safe. I remember turning 13, finally getting the bike I had begged for, only to hear my mom lean over to my aunt at the party and whisper, loud enough that I heard, "That's 2 months of groceries. He better appreciate it." I smiled in the pictures, but inside I felt sick. That bike wasn't a gift. It was another entry in the ledger. By the time I hit my teenage years, I started realizing that my parents weren't normal strict. My friends would talk about how their parents grounded them for staying out too late, or how their moms scolded them for not doing homework. But none of them described their parents as accountants keeping track of every dime spent on them. When I cautiously asked one of my closest friends if his parents ever made him feel like he owed them, he looked at me confused and said, "Dude, they're my parents. That's just what parents do. They take care of you." That was the first time I realized something was deeply off. But knowing it and escaping it were two very different things. At 15, I got my first part-time job at a grocery store. It was minimum wage, and most of my paychecks went straight into gas for my parents' car because they insisted I pay for using it. Dad would hold out his hand every Friday night when I got home, saying, "Don't forget you're paying rent now. You live under my roof, you pay your way." I didn't get an allowance. I didn't save money. Every dollar was sucked back into the black hole of what I owed. They made it impossible for me to get ahead. If I worked, they wanted my money. If I studied, they'd mock me for wasting time, instead of working more hours. And if I ever pushed back, even a little, I'd get the same threat. "Fine. Leave. But don't come crawling back when the world chews you up. You'll be on your own, and we won't help." That threat used to terrify me. Until one night, it didn't anymore. I was 17, sitting at the kitchen table after another screaming match about me not being grateful enough. My dad had slammed his stupid little notebook down again, filled with fake numbers, pretending like my existence was bankrupting him. And something just clicked. I realized they weren't going to stop. Not when I turned 18. Not when I got a real job. Not even if I handed them every paycheck until I died. The debt was never meant to be repaid. It was meant to keep me small. That night, I silently made a decision. I was going to leave the second I legally could, and I was never going to owe them another thing. I moved out the week I turned 18. Not with a triumphant movie montage, not with a car packed to the roof and a friend shouting, "Freedom!" Just me, a duffel bag with shirts that didn't really fit, a plastic storage bin with my binder of school notes, and the $22 I'd managed to keep from the rent my dad clawed from my part-time job. I waited until Sunday morning when they were at church so the hallway would be clear of commentary, slid my key under the welcome mat, and walked to the bus stop. It was June. The asphalt wavered in the heat like the street was trying to shake me off. My phone buzzed before I'd even reached the transfer point. Voicemail from my mom, then a text, "Where are you?" Before I could answer, another, "Don't be dramatic. We can talk about responsibility when you're back." Then my dad, "You think the world is going to feed you? You can't even afford toothpaste without us." I put the phone on airplane mode and stared out the bus window at the chain-link fences and the kind of lawns that look like they've given up. I kept my hands in my pockets to stop them from shaking. I had a plan. Not a great one, but something. Mr. Alvarez, the janitor at my high school, had a son who rented rooms above a tire shop. "Not fancy," he'd said, handing me a handwritten address on a folded napkin. "But the roof doesn't leak." The room was 8 by 10, with a door that didn't quite latch unless you lifted it, and a window that faced a brick wall. No closet. The mattress looked like it had seen some things. But it was mine. $200 a month, cash. Utilities included, which meant a single-space heater and a stubborn ceiling fan that clacked like a metronome. I got a job bussing tables at a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away because they didn't ask many questions and paid nightly tips. The manager, a woman named Joy who wore a glittery pin that said "Be nice or leave," slid a paper application toward me. "You got reliable shoes?" she asked. I nodded. "You got a problem with late nights and drunks?" I shook my head. "Good. You start now." She handed me an apron that smelled like onions and coffee. The first month was a collage of small humiliations: burning my wrist on a plate I thought was cool, scraping dried egg off a vinyl booth at 3 a.m., counting out quarters on my bed to see if I could afford razors and bread. I learned how to stretch a bag of rice into a week of meals. I learned that if you buy dented cans, the cashier stops noticing you. I learned that when you don't have much, every mistake echoes. Overdraw your account by $5? Congratulations, you just bought a $35 lesson. I kept my phone on airplane mode most days because the messages came in waves. "My dad again, return the car key you stole." I hadn't. "My mom, do you have any idea what your food costs were? We can send a breakdown if you want to be independent." Then later, "We're not mad. We're just hurt. After all we did." The pendulum swing, anger to guilt to sticky sweetness, was familiar. It made my stomach twist. I worked my shifts and tried to let the static in my head settle. I enrolled at the community college 2 bus lines away because the counselor at high school had circled the brochure and said, "You're good with patterns and puzzles. Try the intro programming class. Worst case, you hate it." I took the placement tests on a borrowed pencil and felt out of place in a hallway full of kids who had parents hugging them at the door. I bought used textbooks that smelled like someone else's coffee and sweat. I read until my eyes throbbed under the cracked ceiling paint, balancing loops and conditionals in my head while the diner's grease fog still clung to my clothes. Money was a math problem I had to pass to keep breathing. I drew a budget on a piece of cardboard torn from an old box: rent, food, bus, school. "Don't buy anything that doesn't make you warmer, cleaner, or smarter," I wrote along the edge in Sharpie. Joy started giving me the Sunday morning shifts because I was the only one who showed up on time after the bar rush. You work like you're being chased, she said once, not unkindly. I get it. Every few weeks I caved and took my phone off airplane mode to deal with the messages, like lancing a blister. My mom left voicemails with a practiced hush, the tone people use when they want to sound reasonable on a recording. Honey, you can't just run away from your obligations. Your father calculated what you cost last month: food, utilities, gas, all of it, and frankly, it's shocking. We're willing to set up a payment plan. We're not monsters. Then my dad, louder in the background. Tell him we want 200 by Friday, or he can forget ever using our name for a reference. I listened until the meter ran out, then deleted them all. I imagined their notebook on the kitchen table like a shrine, fresh lines added in neat columns labeled with my existence. There were small wins that felt like stolen sunshine. The first time I paid rent on the 1st. The day Joy handed me an extra shift without the sigh. Getting an 89 on a midterm I took half asleep, a perfect arc drawn in red pen around a function I finally understood. Mr. Alvarez came by the diner once, mop bucket in tow from another job. He sat at the counter, ordered black coffee, and said, "Look at you. Surviving." I nodded and swallowed a knot in my throat. It felt like the first time an adult had described me in a way that wasn't a bill. I made mistakes. I bought a used laptop from a guy behind the laundromat because my class required one, and it died a week later with a sound like a sigh. I cried in the stairwell where the paint flaked in strips, silently, because there's no point making noise when no one is coming. I picked up a second job on campus in the computer lab, wiping down keyboards and replugging cables. The supervisor, a grad student with chronic yawns, let me sit in on workshops between wiping sessions. "If you keep showing up," he said, tapping a flyer for a certification, "people start assuming you belong." And I did keep showing up. I learned to write tidy functions while drunk soldiers heckled me during the graveyard shift, learned to debug while a toddler screamed somewhere down the hall, learned to hold two truths at once. I was broke and I was building. I stopped waiting to feel safe and started acting like it might be possible. My parents tried new angles when the old ones didn't land. A letter arrived at the diner addressed to me, the envelope fat with stapled printouts, cost of child charts from some government site, highlighted with fluorescent ink. A sticky note in my mother's hand, "Just so you understand what you owe. We're not asking for all of it yet. We're fair." I brought it back to my room, sat on the mattress, and read it front to back. For once, I didn't crumble. I folded the packet and slid it into the plastic sleeve of my binder. Not as proof of their righteousness, but as data. If they want to treat this like a ledger, I thought, my breath steadying, then it can be a ledger. The next time my dad called, I answered. The silence on his end stretched like taffy. "So," he said, voice too casual, "you done playing house? You'll be needing help soon. The world is expensive, son." I pictured the little notebook, the theatrical page flips. "I'm good," I said. My voice surprised me, flat, not defensive. "I'm working. I'm studying. I'll be fine." He snorted. "You think a couple greasy paychecks make you a man? You owe us. Don't forget that." "I won't," I said and hung up. I meant it differently than he did. By the end of that first year, I had calluses on my hands and a GPA that was better than I expected. I had a warehouse of small routines: soak the beans overnight, set 2 alarms, bring extra socks for the double shift, that made life less like falling and more like climbing. I still counted quarters. I still ate soup that tasted like hot salt. But I also started to keep a second notebook next to the cardboard budget, a clean, cheap composition book where I wrote down every dollar that came in and went out, and because I couldn't help myself, a column labeled them. I logged every text, every invoice they referenced, every amount they claimed. Not with panic, but with a clerk's steadiness. If love was a transaction in their house, then I would learn the math and choose the terms. The air in my little room never really smelled fresh. Oil from the shop downstairs climbed the walls, but it felt different when I opened the window at night. Not clean, exactly. Possible. I'd lay back on the mattress, bones sore, and picture a version of my life where no one could pull a ledger out to justify taking my piece. It wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was a path. Narrow, stupidly steep, but a path all the same. I didn't owe them my gratitude for the path. I owed myself the walk. By the time I was 20, I'd gotten used to juggling exhaustion like it was another class on my schedule. Morning shifts at the diner bled into computer lab work into late-night coding sprints in my brick-wall room, then back to the diner before the sun finished rising. I didn't have much of a social life. Friends came and went, guys from the lab who invited me to pizza nights, coworkers who offered me a beer after shift, but I never stayed long. Part of it was money. Part of it was paranoia. Every time I thought about laughing too loud or spending $10 on wings, I heard my dad's voice in my head. You'll never get ahead if you waste like that. You'll always owe. I didn't know it then, but I was learning discipline the hard way. I tracked every cent. I studied in the gaps between bus stops. I said yes to extra shifts, yes to tutoring classmates in exchange for groceries, yes to long nights that felt like they might cave in my chest. The funny thing is, when you have nothing to fall back on, you adapt fast. Scraping by became normal, so progress, even tiny progress, felt monumental. Like the day I bought a refurbished laptop with my own money. Not the kind that wheezed and died like the laundromat one. A real machine that could actually run the software my classes required. I set it up on the crate I used as a desk and just stared at the glow of the screen, fingertips buzzing. It wasn't just a tool. It was proof I could carve out pieces of a future with my own hands. Meanwhile, the messages from my parents never really stopped. I changed numbers twice, but they always found a way, through emails, through letters that showed up at the diner, even once through a Facebook message from my mom's cousin. Always the same script. We supported you for 18 years. Do you think food was free? Do you think rent was free? We sacrificed our time, our energy. You owe us. One letter stands out even now. It was written in my mom's neat cursive, blue ink on lined paper. She had listed, item by item, things like baby formula, 1990 to 1991, $1,200. Clothing, ages 2 to 10, $3,800. School lunches, $2,500. It went on for pages. At the end she wrote, total so far, $38,421. Consider this a starting point for repayment. We are generous enough to allow installments. At the time I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd that laughter was safer than rage. I slid it into my growing binder of evidence. If they wanted to treat me like a debtor, fine. I'd keep the receipts, both theirs and mine. Still, even as I laughed, there was a sting under my ribs. Part of me wanted to scream, why don't you ever just say you love me? Why does it always have to be a bill? But I knew better. If love had been part of the equation, they wouldn't need the ledger. The years between 20 and 24 were about momentum. I transferred to a university after 2 years at community college, thanks to a scholarship cobbled together from grades and sheer persistence. Moving into campus housing was surreal. My room was small, but it had real walls, and the heating actually worked. No oil smell. No clattering ceiling fan. Just quiet. I remember lying awake my first night there, blanket pulled up, and realizing it was the first time I didn't have to factor their house into my survival. I wasn't living above their garage, wasn't handing over my paychecks as rent, wasn't bracing for their guilt trips when I asked for basics. I was free. Not safe yet, but freer than I'd ever been. I worked part-time in IT support on campus, answering endless tickets about my printer won't print, and the Wi-Fi hates me. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid and gave me access to equipment I never could have afforded otherwise. Every paycheck was divided into thirds: living costs, tuition/books, savings. That last category grew slow, but steady. Each month I'd write the number in my notebook, circling it twice. Proof that the hole wasn't bottomless anymore. My parents tried harder when they sensed distance. They left voicemails that swung wildly in tone. Mom, we're worried sick about you. Family is forever. Don't shut us out. Dad, your little degree doesn't erase 18 years of bills. Don't think you can run from debt. Mom again, softer. Maybe when you graduate, you can help us with the mortgage. That would mean so much. By then, though, their words didn't hit the same way. They were background noise. I'd sit at my desk debugging code while their messages piled up, and I realized I didn't feel guilty anymore. Just irritated. Like swatting at a fly that refuses to leave your ear. Graduation was the first real milestone I let myself celebrate. Not with a big party or balloons, but with a single photograph, me in the cap and gown, holding the diploma, smiling so wide my face hurt. I posted it online and made the settings private, just for a handful of friends. I didn't send it to my parents. I knew if they saw it, they'd find a way to twist it, claiming credit for funding me, or reminding me that I now had a degree and could start paying them back properly. Instead, I sent the photo to Joy, my old manager at the diner. She replied with 3 exclamation marks and a picture of her glittery pin. That meant more than any forced congratulations ever could have. After graduation came the job hunt. It was brutal at first. Rejections piled up, some polite, some cold. But I kept at it, sharpening my resume, sending applications in waves, showing up for interviews in the one decent suit I'd bought secondhand. Then one day, an offer landed, entry level in a growing software firm, decent pay, benefits, actual health insurance. I signed the contract and sat on my bed in my tiny rented studio, staring at the paper like it might vanish. My hands shook the way they had the day I left home, except this time it wasn't fear. It was disbelief. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I had a foothold. The job was demanding, but it lit something in me. I loved the challenge, the problem-solving, the constant sense of building something tangible. Paychecks stacked higher than I'd ever seen. I opened a real savings account, not just a shoebox with folded bills. I paid off the credit card I'd used for emergencies. I even let myself buy a decent mattress, brand new, delivered in a box, mine. Every so often, my parents' attempts at contact broke through. A letter here, an email there. My dad once sent a message that read simply, "Your debt grows with interest." I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. Another time, my mom sent a birthday card with no signature, just a sticky note inside, "We're waiting." I didn't reply. But I didn't throw those notes away either. They went into the binder, alongside cost of living statistics I had started printing out. Food, housing, healthcare, all broken down year by year. I'd highlight the numbers, run calculations in spreadsheets, cross-check them against the lists my mom had sent me. It wasn't obsession. It was preparation. Because somewhere along the way, the idea formed, if they wanted repayment so badly, maybe I'd give it to them. On my terms. Down to the cent. It wasn't about spite. Not anymore. It was about closing the loop. About turning their lifelong weapon into something finite, something I could lay down and walk away from. That thought carried me through my mid-20s. I built my career, moved into better apartments, climbed slowly from junior developer to mid-level engineer. Each promotion meant more stability, more distance from the nights of rice and dented cans. Each raise meant more savings in the column marked future. And all the while, the binder thickened. By the time I turned 30, I had more than numbers. I had a plan. When I hit 30, I had 2 constants in my life, a career that finally felt stable, and a binder that had grown fat with years of documentation. At first, the binder had been just a coping mechanism, a way to prove to myself that my parents' threats weren't amorphous clouds but finite words on finite pages. But sometime in my late 20s, staring at a fresh email from my mom with the subject line, "Don't forget your responsibilities," I realized the binder wasn't just defense. It was ammunition. It began one night after work. I'd just come home from a long day debugging, cracked open a cheap beer, and opened the binder out of habit. The letters with their highlighted totals, the voicemails I'd transcribed, the cost of raising a child, PDFs I'd printed from government websites, it was all there. My parents had meant to use numbers as chains, but numbers had another quality. They were finite. Measurable. Conquerable. For years they told me, "You'll never repay us." But as I flipped through the binder, calculator in hand, I realized, what if I actually could? Down to the cent. What if I gave them exactly what they always demanded, no more, no less, and then closed the book for good? The thought made my pulse race. Not out of fear this time, but clarity. They wanted to turn love into a transaction? Fine. I'd pay the bill. And then, just like with any creditor, I'd walk away debt-free. I got methodical. Step 1. Establish the baseline. I pulled the U.S. Department of Agriculture's annual reports on the cost of raising a child. The numbers varied depending on income bracket, location, inflation. But I stuck with the middle-income national averages, year by year, from 1990 to 2008, birth to 18. Food, housing, healthcare, clothing, miscellaneous. I built a spreadsheet with rows for every year of my childhood, columns for each category, and a formula that adjusted for inflation. Step 2. Cross-reference with their claims. Remember my mom's cursive breakdown of baby formula and school lunches? The highlighted government handouts? The total letters where my dad added everything up like he was billing a client? I plugged those figures into the sheet as a comparison. Unsurprisingly, their numbers were inflated, sometimes laughably so. My mom claimed $2,500 in school lunches by age 10. USDA estimates for that time period? Closer to $1,600. Their totals were padded with imaginary interest. Step 3. Strip out what I covered myself. By the time I was 15, I was working. Gas money, clothes, even a share of groceries, they'd wrung those out of me. I made careful deductions for those years. Every Friday I remembered handing over cash, every bus pass I bought with my own paycheck, every rent contribution they demanded. Subtract, subtract, subtract. Step 4. Add precision. I tracked down receipts from a box of old papers I'd saved when I left home, school registration forms, medical bills I'd seen on the counter, a copy of my immunization chart with fees listed. I compared them to average costs from that era. I wasn't aiming for perfection, but for rigor. The kind of calculation no one could argue against without looking absurd. After months of weekend work, late-night number crunching, and way too many coffee stains on printouts, I had it, a grand total. The amount my parents could reasonably be said to have spent on me from birth to 18, adjusted for inflation, minus what I had already paid into their ledger. The number stared at me from the bottom of the spreadsheet, $48,327. 56, that was it. Not 6 figures. Not a mountain I could never climb. Just under 50 grand. To some people, that's pocket change. To me, it was a lifetime of weight reduced to something solid. Something payable. I sat back in my chair and let out a laugh that startled even me. All those years of them waving a vague, infinite debt over my head. All those guilt trips and threats. And here it was, finite. A bill I could clear. The decision hardened in me over the next year. I wouldn't just ignore their ledger. I would beat it. On their own terms. Not by playing small, but by paying it off with the success they swore I'd never achieve. That meant saving with a new focus. My career was in a good place by then. I'd climbed into a senior role at my company, bonuses rolling in, salary more than comfortable. I wasn't living lavishly, but I didn't need to anymore. My apartment was decent, my pantry full, my mattress soft. Everything else? Funneled into the debt repayment fund. That's literally what I labeled the savings account. I wanted to see the words every time I checked my balance. Meanwhile, their attempts at contact grew more sporadic but still carried the same venom. My dad left a voicemail saying, "You're a thief. You stole 18 years from us. You'll never pay it back." My mom emailed me with subject lines like, "Are you ready to be fair yet?" Sometimes she tried softness. "We miss you. Maybe you could help us with the mortgage. It would mean a lot." Other times, blunt. "Your debt grows every year you delay." I didn't respond. Not once. Not even to argue. I just saved everything, archived everything, cataloged everything. The binder swelled until I had to split it into 2 volumes, Evidence and Calculations. By 31, the debt repayment fund had surpassed the magic number, $48,327. 56. For a few months, I sat with that balance, not touching it. Testing the feeling. Was I really ready? Was this the moment? The answer came one ordinary Tuesday. I was on my lunch break at work, sipping bad office coffee, when another email popped into my inbox. My mom again. Subject line: "When will you grow up?" Inside: "Your father says you've cost us closer to $80,000 by now. We expect you to acknowledge it before it's too late. Don't you feel ashamed?" I stared at the screen, then at the sticky note I kept on my monitor, The exact total, circled twice in red. $48,327.56. I didn't feel shame. I felt ready. That night, I opened my bank app. Fingers steady, I scheduled a transfer from the debt repayment fund to their joint account, the same one they'd used for all their threats, still listed on the letters. Amount: $48,327.56. Memo line: debt repaid. I hovered over the confirm button for a second, heart pounding. Then I clicked. A whoosh animation, a green checkmark. Done. Just like that, the ledger was closed. But I wasn't finished. I went through every contact method they had ever used: phone numbers, emails, social media. Block. 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 I set filters so their names would never even reach my inbox again. I deleted old voicemails but kept the transcripts in the binder, not out of fear, but as history. Proof of what was over. The next morning, I woke up lighter than I'd ever felt. My chest didn't buzz with the usual static of dread. I brewed coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and realized, for the first time in my life, I didn't owe them anything. Not money. Not explanations. Not access to me. Nothing. And the best part? I hadn't escaped by ignoring their rules. I'd beaten them with precision, with the very weapon they tried to use against me. Love may never have been free in their house, but peace was. And now, it was mine. The transfer cleared within 24 hours. My banking app showed the balance gone from my savings account and a neat confirmation stamp: funds delivered. It felt strangely anticlimactic, like paying a utility bill. No thunder, no dramatic music. Just numbers moving from one column to another. But the storm came soon enough. I hadn't blocked them before sending the transfer. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to open their account, rub their eyes, and realize the burden they'd weaponized my whole life was now settled in cold, undeniable math. The first call came that evening. My phone buzzed as I was chopping vegetables for dinner, Dad Mobile. I watched the name flash across the screen. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel dread. I let it ring out. A minute later, voicemail. "What the hell is this?" His voice was sharp, too loud for the recording. "You think this is funny? You think you can wipe your slate clean like that? Money doesn't buy back 18 years. We gave you everything. Everything. And you think 50 grand makes us square?" He laughed, ugly and bitter. "You're still ours. Don't forget that." I saved the voicemail and set my phone down calmly. The knife in my hand felt steadier than his words ever had. The next morning, my inbox had 3 emails. Mom's subject lines: "We saw the money. This isn't what we meant. You can't cut family out with a dollar amount." Her messages were layered, like always. At first, disbelief: "We didn't ask you to dump money like this out of nowhere." Then guilt: "Do you really think cash erases everything we've done for you? You insult us by putting a number on love." Then manipulation: "If you wanted to make amends, you'd move back closer, you'd help us in person." This is cold. Heartless. The third email ended with a sentence that made me laugh out loud at my desk: "Your father says the total is at least $200,000. If you're serious about being fair, you'll continue paying until we say otherwise." That was the moment I knew the plan had worked. Because the anger, the bargaining, the endless moving of goalposts, they were predictable. They were the exact script I'd lived under for 18 years. But now, the difference was simple: the ledger was closed on my side. I had given them precisely what they demanded, nothing more, and they couldn't unpay it. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the binder open one last time. I printed the bank confirmation and slid it into the very back sleeve. Then I wrote in bold black marker across the front cover: "Closed." And then I blocked them. Everywhere. Phone numbers, emails, Facebook, even distant cousins who might try to mediate. I wasn't angry when I did it. I wasn't giddy. Just calm. Like locking a door at night. For a few weeks after, I'd get little whiffs of their fury through second-hand channels. A mutual acquaintance from my hometown messaged me on LinkedIn: "Your folks are saying you cut them off after sending some kind of settlement? What's going on?" I ignored it. I had tried calling from a different number, straight to voicemail. I ignored that too. My parents escalated in predictable ways. They sent letters to my office addressed to our son. My receptionist handed me one with a puzzled look. I opened it in private. Inside, another rant about how family can't be bought, and how your debt is spiritual, not financial. I shredded it and added the empty envelope to the binder before tucking it into my closet for good. The silence after that was profound. No more surprise calls at 2 a.m. No more guilt-laden voicemails while I sat in class. No more reminders that my very existence carried interest. It was like someone had finally turned off a radio that had been blaring static my entire life. At first, the quiet was disorienting. I'd catch myself waiting for the next shoe to drop, like muscle memory. But weeks stretched into months, and nothing came. Just silence. In that space, I began noticing things I'd missed. My mornings weren't rushed with anxiety. Coffee tasted like coffee, not like adrenaline. The weight between my shoulders lifted in increments until one day I realized it was gone. Work flourished. Without the background noise of their constant demands, I could pour my energy into projects fully. My manager noticed. Promotions followed. Pay raises, new responsibilities, colleagues who actually respected me for what I built, not what I owed. I started traveling. First small trips, weekends to nearby cities, exploring new food, taking pictures of things that had nothing to do with survival. Then bigger ones, Europe, Asia, places my parents used to mock as luxuries for people with no responsibilities. Standing on a train platform in Tokyo, watching commuters stream past, I felt freer than I ever had. There were moments when I wondered if I should feel guilt. Cutting off family isn't small. Money had changed hands. Shouldn't I feel conflicted? But the truth was I didn't. I'd lived with guilt as my shadow since childhood, and for the first time, it wasn't there. What replaced it wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. They had always told me parenting was a transaction. I didn't believe that. Deep down, I knew love isn't something you tally in notebooks or highlight with fluorescent markers. But if they insisted, if they built our entire relationship on debt, then the fairest revenge was to settle it exactly as they framed it. A transaction paid in full? Nothing more. When I thought of them now, I didn't feel hate. I felt distance. Like remembering a job you once had where the boss was cruel, but you walked away and built a better career. It wasn't part of your present anymore. Just a story you tell to remind yourself how far you've come. One night, nearly a year after the transfer, I found myself lying on my couch staring at the ceiling. For years, my mind had always drifted to the same loop: calculations, debts, obligations, guilt. Now the loop was gone, replaced by stillness. I whispered aloud, half to myself. Debt repaid. The words tasted clean, final. That was the revenge. Not just the money, not just the note in the memo line. The real revenge was silence. The absence of them. The freedom to define my life without their ledger looming over it. And I intended to keep it that way. The first year after I made the transfer was quiet in ways I'd never experienced. At first the silence felt unnatural, like walking into a house where the TV had been blaring for so long that you'd forgotten what a room sounded like without it. But gradually, the absence of my parents' voices, no more guilt trips, no more threats, settled into something that felt like breathing for the first time. I used to think survival was all there was. For so long, everything in my life had been about getting away, working enough hours to cover rent, studying enough to get a scholarship, building enough distance that I wasn't within their reach. Once the ledger was closed and the noise was gone, I realized I had no idea who I was without survival as my engine. It started small. Saturday mornings, I'd wake up and realize there was nothing to brace for. No sudden call demanding I drive across town to help with some chore, no guilt-laden reminder about rent. I began to cook actual breakfasts instead of shoving instant noodles down before running to work. Pancakes, omelets, things that took more than 3 minutes. I learned to enjoy the simple act of eating without a voice in my head telling me what I owed for the plate. Then it spread. Vacations. Hobbies. I bought a camera and started taking long walks just to photograph shadows on buildings, light on water, strangers laughing in cafes. I signed up for a pottery class because I liked the idea of making something with my hands that wasn't code. I even joined a gym, not because I was punishing myself to be stronger, but because it felt good to move in a way that belonged entirely to me. At work I thrived. Without the background hum of guilt, I had bandwidth. I could focus fully on projects, take risks, pitch ideas. My colleagues started calling me the fixer, because I had a knack for untangling messy code no one else wanted to touch. Within 2 years I'd been promoted twice. The pay was more than I ever imagined as a kid counting quarters in a brick-walled room. I bought a condo at 32. Not a mansion, not a showpiece. Just a clean, sunlit place with hardwood floors and a balcony that caught the morning light. I furnished it slowly, deliberately, picking things I actually liked instead of whatever was cheapest at the thrift store. A bookshelf filled with novels I never had time for as a teenager. A couch I could sink into without springs digging into my back. My home became mine in a way my childhood house never was. And yet, even with the peace, shadows lingered. Sometimes I'd be in the grocery store, staring at a display of cereal, and I'd hear my mom sigh in my head. "Do you have any idea what this costs us?" I'd pick up a box, freeze, then remind myself out loud. "I can afford this. I don't know anyone for this." People probably thought I was odd, muttering to myself in aisle 3, but it worked. Other times, success itself felt dangerous. I'd get a bonus at work and instinctively feel like someone was about to snatch it away, like my dad holding out his hand on Fridays. I had to train myself to pause, breathe, and remind myself, this is mine. I earned this. No ledger attached. Therapy helped. I resisted it for years because, honestly, I didn't want to rehash everything with a stranger. But once I'd created real distance, I finally had the space to process. My therapist listened without judgment as I described the notebooks, the fake bills, the transfer. She didn't call it revenge. She called it a clean boundary. I liked that better. Slowly, I started to trust my own joy. I traveled more. Italy, where I ate pasta in a back alley restaurant run by a family who treated me like a cousin within an hour. Iceland, where I hiked under skies that stayed bright until midnight. On those trips, I sometimes thought of my parents. Not with longing, but with a strange sort of disbelief. You tried to convince me the world would chew me up the second I left you, I'd think, staring at mountains or seas or cities buzzing with life. But the world is kinder than you ever were. The strangest part of freedom was realizing I didn't hate them anymore. Hate takes energy, and I was done giving them that. What I felt instead was nothing. They became background characters in my life. People whose lines I'd memorized but whose presence no longer mattered. I heard bits and pieces through distant relatives. My parents still lived in the same house, still told anyone who'd listen that I was ungrateful. Apparently, they framed the story so that I had abandoned them after they sacrificed everything. I didn't correct anyone. Let them talk. I wasn't in that story anymore. One of my coworkers once asked me, over lunch, why I never talk about my family. I shrugged and said, "Some debts aren't worth carrying." He laughed, thinking it was just a metaphor. I smiled and let him think that. The binder still sits in my closet. I don't open it often, but I don't throw it away either. It's not an obsession anymore, it's an artifact. A record of what I survived, a reminder that the ledger really did close. Sometimes, when doubt creeps in, I'll pull it out, flip to the page with the bank confirmation, and trace my finger over the words, debt repaid. Then I slide it back, close the closet door, and move on with my day. Peace, I've learned, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or grand gestures. It's in the morning coffee where your chest isn't tight. It's in the ability to buy a new coat without hearing someone mutter about grocery money. It's in sitting on your balcony at sunset, realizing the silence isn't empty, it's yours. By the time I turned 33, the shadows had dimmed enough that I didn't just survive, I actually lived. I turned 33 last spring. No party, no big announcement, just a quiet dinner with a couple of friends, laughter echoing in my condo, and a cake that actually had my name spelled right. It was simple, but it hit me harder than anything. This is what family feels like. Not people keeping ledgers, not manipulation dressed as love. Just people who show up because they want to, not because they're owed. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about that final transfer, the neat green checkmark on my bank app, the memo line that said debt repaid. At the time, I thought the revenge was the money. I thought it was the calculation, the precision, the act of paying them back on the very battlefield they built. And yes, it was satisfying to weaponize their obsession against them. To say, here, down to the cent, now you have nothing left to hold over me. But with distance, I see the real revenge wasn't the transfer. It was the silence afterward. The life I built that they can't touch. The fact that they screamed and bargained and tried every trick in their arsenal, and none of it landed. Their weapons turned to dust because I stopped playing the game. Growing up, they told me love was a transaction. That every meal, every ride to school, every band-aid on a scraped knee was an invoice waiting to be paid. They hammered it so deep into me that as a kid, I truly believed I'd spend my life chained to their ledger. For years, I hated myself for being a burden, for costing them too much. But here's the truth I've learned: love isn't a debt. Parenting isn't a loan. You don't bring a child into the world and then demand repayment with interest. And if someone tries to make you believe that, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away. When I sent that money, I didn't buy my freedom, I already had it. I'd carved it out through years of rice dinners, sleepless nights, double shifts, and coding marathons. What I bought was closure. I handed them exactly what they demanded, exactly how they demanded it. And then I shut the door. Sometimes people ask me, if they find out bits of the story, whether I regret it. Whether I wish I'd just cut them off without giving them a dime. And I get why they ask. Why give abusers anything? Why not keep the money for yourself? Here's my answer: because I needed it. Not them. They didn't deserve a cent, but I needed the act of paying them back on my own terms. I needed to see that number zero out, to close the book they'd been writing since the day I was born. It wasn't about generosity. It wasn't about them at all. It was about me being able to say, without hesitation, I owe you nothing. Not anymore. Not ever again. It's been years now, and I haven't heard from them since the blocked letters. Maybe they've finally accepted it. Maybe they're still out there, grumbling to anyone who'll listen about their ungrateful son. I don't care. Their voices no longer live rent-free in my head. What lives there instead are other things. The sound of my balcony door sliding open on a summer morning. The taste of coffee I brewed in a kitchen that no one can take from me. The pride of solving a problem at work and knowing it was my brain, my effort, not survival panic, that carried me through. The laughter of friends who've become my chosen family. That's the real wealth. I don't look at my childhood as something that defines me anymore. It shaped me, yes. It gave me scars, yes. But it also taught me resilience, taught me how to track every dime until I could make dollars work for me, taught me how to live without a safety net. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I survived it. And survival turned into strength. To anyone reading this who grew up under parents like mine, parents who tell you that you're a debt, that you're an expense, that you'll never repay them, hear this: they are lying. You don't know them for existing. You don't know anyone for the right to breathe. If love is offered as a transaction, it isn't love. If family is held over your head like a bill, it isn't family. You can leave. You can build a life on your own. It won't be easy. It might be the hardest thing you ever do. But every step you take away from their ledger is a step toward peace. I used to imagine that when I finally paid them back, I'd feel triumphant. Like a movie ending, fireworks in the background, me walking away while everything burned behind me. The reality was quieter. I clicked a button, blocked some numbers, and woke up the next morning to the sound of birds outside my window. And that was enough. Because in the end, the best revenge wasn't the payment, or the note, or even the silence. The best revenge was joy. The joy of living without tally marks on my existence. The joy of building something entirely mine. The joy of knowing that their legacy ends with me, because I will never pass on that kind of poison. Debt repaid. Ledger closed. And for the first time in my life, I am free.